Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ is born.
Glorify him.
Good morning, everybody. God bless you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
It's the seventh day of Christmas. What does the true love give?
7 swans are swimming.
7 swans swimming. I didn't see any swans today, so we'll see how it goes. So last Sunday, I talked to you about the significance of the town of Bethlehem. Its prophetic significance, its symbolic significance, its historical significance, and why it's the appropriate place for the Messiah to be born and to come into the world. And I promised you that if I could get my act together, I would talk to you about caves. Because if you look at the icon, and if you listen to the hymnography of the church, you will see that the stable in which the Christ child is born is always depicted as a cave, which is a lot different than what you see in front of your local, courthouses and such, and your little manger scenes. It's usually, a wooden stable like what you might see in a rural American setting, of course. But in the first century Judea, especially in the hill country of Bethlehem, the people most often used the great number of caves in the hillsides for things like that. And remember, we talked about where was this inn was not like your local Hilton or Marriott. It was a caravanserai. It was like a truck stop, if you will, of the ancient world, a place where caravans would come on their way from Jerusalem to Egypt and up to the North Country as well. So it's a very rustic location, and so they would not have had a fancy stable arrangement or something like that. They used what they had on hand, which was caves. And the earliest attestation we have to that comes from the middle of the 2nd century from 2 sources. The first is St. Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Trypho says this. He says, when the child was born in Bethlehem, since Joseph could not find a lodging in that village, he took up his quarters in a certain cave near the village. And while they were there, Mary brought forth the Christ child and placed him in a manger. And here the Magi who came from Arabia found him. Now I have repeated to you what Isaiah foretold about the sign which overshadowed the cave. And I shall again remind you of the passage, and he quotes from the prophecy of Isaiah in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, where in 33:16 it says, and he shall dwell in a high cave of a strong rock, or in a lofty cave. And this was considered a very fine picking of a verse to show that there was a fulfillment of prophecy in that. But in his time, it was a known place. And in fact, what might actually be a better piece of evidence for its attestation as the cave of the Nativity was that certain followers of mystery religions, the followers of Mithraism, claimed that they went to that cave and there were initiated in the mysteries of Mithras. So pagans were co-opting a Christian holy site already in the 2nd century for their own uses. So it's an interesting little bit there that by that time Justin could say, you can go there and see the place. It's known. And in fact, as I mentioned, the Church of the Nativity was built over this cave. It's one of the oldest continuing operating churches in the world. St. Jerome was a monk there. We usually think of him as a Western saint because he translated the Bible into the Vulgate or to the Latin. But he did the translating work at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So that's one of the first sources. The second source is one that you may be familiar with from my preaching, and that is the Proto-Gospel of St. James, or the Proto-Evangelium. Another 2nd century document which tells more of the story of Joseph and Mary and their family, the source from which we get the names of his grandparents, Joachim and Anna, that you hear at the end of liturgy. Who's Joachim and Anna, the ancestors of God? They're talked about in the Proto-Gospel of James. All of this is included in the church tradition from the very earliest time. And in the Proto-Gospel of James, it includes not only the kind of things you're more familiar with from the Nativity story in the Gospels, but also includes kind of some of the surrounding tidbits of information, including what you might see on the icon. There are other figures there that you may not recognize, the two young women with the Christ child and the bath of water. That's the midwives. The midwives are not mentioned in the Gospels, but they are mentioned in the Proto-Gospel of James. And in fact, it says Joseph, once he got established at the cave in Mary's time, he went looking very rapidly for a midwife for the sake of his betrothed. And he, having found a woman, a Hebrew woman coming out, he kind of, "You're a midwife, great, come with me," and brought her to the cave. And here, quite an extraordinary story is told. And she said, "Where is this child to be born of a virgin?" And he says, "Come and see." And the midwife went away with him, and they stood in the place of the cave, and behold, now listen to this, if you've been taking my classes, this will ring a bunch of alarm bells. "Behold, a luminous cloud overshadowed the cave. And the midwife said, My soul has been magnified this day, because my eyes have seen strange things, because salvation has been brought forth in Israel. And immediately the cloud disappeared out of the cave, and a great light shone in the cave, so that the eyes could not bear it. And in a little that light gradually decreased, until the infant appeared, and went and took the breast from his mother Mary. And the midwife cried out and said, This is a great day to me, because I have seen this strange sight." Now this strange sight, the theophanic glory cloud, the cloud of glory, and the light, the pillar of light, and then the light from within the cave itself, is clearly reminiscent of the events of the Exodus, the tabernacle, and then later the temple being overshadowed with the cloud of glory, being filled with the light, the holy Shekinah of God. It's a testimony that in this moment, this lofty cave, if you will, in this little town of Bethlehem, becomes the mountain of God, and becomes the holy temple of the tabernacle in which Christ is enthroned. The Lord is enthroned. So it's an incredible set of images. And the proto-gospel includes the Magi. And it says that after the Magi went to Herod, they went out, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them until they came to the cave. And it stood over the top of the cave. And that's what you see in the icons, is the image of the star sitting kind of at the top of the cave. And the Magi saw the infant with his mother Mary, and they brought forth from their bag gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, the cave is not mentioned at all. It's not mentioned in either Gospel. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it just says, then they went to the house, the Ikion in Greek. And then they found the virgin and the child. Now, how did a document only about maybe 100 years later at most, and attributed to James, the brother of the Lord, have such a different sounding detail? Did they mess it up? Were they already messing up the Bible 100 years out? Was it all this kind of argument that's made? Well, again, if we want to understand what caves are and what stables are and what the inn was, the inn is, yes, as we said, the inn of Chimham, the adopted son of David. It's the household, and that includes the entire thing. Like your house includes your garage, right? If you have a garage. I don't. So I miss my garage. In Michigan, you have to have it when growing up. But it's part of that household. So it's not a contradiction. It's just a different idea. Like when we hear this, we tend to think building and structure, whereas in the ancient world, it means the kind of the whole facility, if you will. And that includes the cave. So that's not really a contradiction there. And from the very earliest centuries, this cave was the standard understanding of the Nativity location. Who cares, Father David? What's the big deal with caves? Well, first of all, you have to realize something. We are by nature cave dwellers, all of us. We have only been living in caves made of wood and brick for the last 5 to 10,000 years tops. For most of human experience, and all of prehistory essentially, humanity were living in caves or in other shelters similar to caves. And throughout the most difficult experiences and cataclysms, caves have remained the place of shelter. They are just a part of our life. There's something primal and something comforting about being in the shelter of a nice, not a dank, wet, nasty cave, but like a hobbit hole cave. A dry and comfortable cave, which means comfort, right? It has all that good warmth to it. When I was a senior in high school, I'm going to take credit for it because I don't understand why they would have done this, but I was like, that's the kind of guy I was like, we have to do this. We decided for our spring break, we were going to make a road trip and go camping in Mammoth Caves National Park in Kentucky, which is an absolutely beautiful park. If you haven't ever gone, I really encourage it. And a big part of our trip was, of course, going into the caves on the tours, but then we went into the backcountry, and there we did some amateur spelunking of our own wherever we could find a naturally occurring cave. Now, for good reason, the really big cave complexes in the backcountry are all sealed off. They don't want people getting lost in there, so they control it. But there's a few small little caves you can go into. And me and my buddy Steve go into this cave with our flashlights, and we're all thinking we're super brave and everything, and it's like a little narrow thing, a little crack in the rock, and you go in about 20 feet, and inside there's this little circular room, maybe 10 feet around or something like that. And there was one bat hanging from the roof of that cave. But as far as we're concerned, that could have been Dracula for all we knew. So we kind of quietly backed out and said, okay, that was pretty cool, but let's not get the bat chasing us. So later, about a year later or 2 years later, when I was in college, I actually got to do real spelunking with like the gear, the helmets, and the knee pads, and the ropes, and all that kind of stuff. And I love spelunking. It's absolutely wonderful. Spelunking is like rock climbing for people with agoraphobia. If you don't like heights, do spelunking because it's like mostly crawling and being in a very tight area. Now, if you have claustrophobia, don't. I'm afraid to do it now because I'm a bit fatter and I would be very afraid of getting stuck. And I have nightmares about it to this day where I'm like, I can't get through the whole thing. But you have to be able to slither and shimmy and do all kinds of fun things. So caves are really, really a fascinating thing for me personally, which is why I wanted to do the sermon. But caves have a very important role in the rest of Scripture as well, just like the town of Bethlehem. And it all has to do with the figure that we're commemorating today in the church, David, the king. Because Christ comes to Bethlehem to be the son of David, to be connected to that messianic prophecy. He's born there as the son of David. David knew these cavernous hills very, very well and dwelt in this hill country and used these caves to great effect. For example, in 1 Samuel 22, when after he has killed Goliath and Saul has found out that Samuel has anointed him king in his place and is not very happy about it, he wants to hunt down David. So David goes and he hides in what's called the cave of Adullam, or the cave of refuge, basically. It's in the valley kind of southwest of Bethlehem. But the Philistines are out and about still, and they're also hunting for David. So it's not a good time for David. He's kind of on the lam, and he hides out there. And a bunch of his buddies find out that he's there. I don't know if they used the term buddies back then, but his kinsfolk and fellow warriors found out that they're kind of this young hero, David, is hiding in the cave, and they go and join them. And this cave is big enough, actually, that about 400 men hide out in this cave. And it becomes their like hidden base, and they go out sorties against the enemy. They conduct these operations until they have to flee there. And it says in 1 Samuel 23 that David went through the strongholds of the wilderness. Strongholds of the wilderness means the caves. In the wilderness, there are no forts. That's why it's wilderness. strongholds of the wilderness are the caves in which they dwelt. And in fact, there's a number of psalms in the Bible that are attributed to David when he was in the cave, or when he was in the cave hiding from Saul, for example. And two of the most important of those are Psalms 141 and 142. Does anybody know how that starts? Because you hear it every Vesper service. Lord, I have cried to you. Hear me, O Lord. Right? That whole sequence of prayers, the Lord I have cried sequence in Vespers, is said at every evening service of the Orthodox Church every day of the year throughout the whole world. So these psalms, because when you're hiding in a cave, there's not much to do except cry about it and sing sad songs. So that's what David did, being the blues artist that he was. But it's also, it gets, the real meaning of it comes through in Psalm 18. The Lord is my rock and my fortress, my deliverer. The rock and the fortress that's talking about caves. When they're hiding in the rocks, they're not like hiding behind a rock. They're hiding in the caverns of the ground. They're hiding in the crevices and the places underneath. And so David uses all these caves to great effect, much as like even in this century, the Taliban, frankly, would use caverns to extraordinarily great effect in their insurgency wars, right? And it worked. In 1 Samuel 24, though, there is an extraordinary story that comes forth between David and Saul. And this is now in En-Gedi, which is on the Jordan Valley of like the Dead Sea area, kind of. And it's very close to where the caves of Qumran were, for example. And David is hiding out in the cave with his men. It's another big cave complex. And it says that Saul is angry with him again, and he goes hunting after him. And it says this: when Saul had returned from following the Philistines, it was told him, saying, "Take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." And Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend to his needs, which is in the Hebrew to basically drop his drawers and take care of those needs, if you take my meaning. And David and his men were hiding in the recesses of the cave. And the men of David said to him, "This is the day which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose. He snuck up on Saul in that very vulnerable situation. And it says that he secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. I don't know if he had taken it off and put it aside, or it was still like on him, but either way, it's pretty daring. And afterward, it had happened that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed," because Saul had been anointed to be king by the word of the Lord. So he was, in his own way, a Christ. As defective as Saul was, he was the Lord's anointed one at the time. "I should not stretch out my hand against him, since he is the anointed of the Lord." So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to pounce on Saul. And Saul got up from the cave, not knowing any worse, and went his way. And then it says, David arose afterward and went out of the cave and called out to Saul, saying, "My lord the king." This guy's got some bravery to him. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Indeed, David seeks your harm'? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave. And someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand? For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand. and I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my life to take my life away. Let the Lord judge between you and me. Let the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. The proverb of the ancient says, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a flea? Therefore let the Lord be a judge between you and me, and see and plead my case and deliver me out of your hand. So he pleads his case. He humbles himself before Saul. He shows him the evidence of his good intentions. And it says this beautiful response didn't last, but it was good at the time. So it was when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, is this your voice, my son, David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And then he said to David, you are more righteous than I am, for you have rewarded me with good, whereas I have rewarded you with evil. And you have shown this day how you have dealt well with me. For when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him get away safely? Therefore may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now I know indeed that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Therefore swear now to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house. And David swore to Saul. And Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. They had still had Philistines to fight. So Saul accepts and recognizes David as the king, and he also gets David to swear that he will not, in some kind of Game of Thrones type thing, kill off all his family. And it's a really beautiful image of reconciliation. So think about these things. This image of what caves did in the history of salvation, so to speak, in setting up for the coming of the Messiah. David is hidden in the rocks near Bethlehem to avoid the Philistines. Christ, as the son of David, is hidden in the rocks of Bethlehem and kept safe. When David flees from Saul, the king is furious. He comes after him. In another part of the story, at one point, David flees when Saul is looking for him and goes hiding in the caves. And Saul is so upset that David got away that he takes a guy named Ahimelech. You all know Ahimelech, the priest of Nob. You all know Nob. And he says, you were a friend of David, you and all your priest buddies. And Saul tells his henchman, Dog, I like to call him Dog, Doeg the Edomite, says, kill Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob. And so hundreds of priests are killed in that day and slaughtered at the hand of the mad king Saul for David getting away. And of course, when David, the son of David, Christ, is able to flee the cave, King Herod sends his soldiers and kills the holy innocents in the town of Bethlehem. When David hides from Saul in the rocks of En-Gedi and spares Saul's life and makes peace with him, Saul calls him my son, and you are the king. When Christ emerges from his hiding place, if you will, of his youth, and is appeared before men in the Holy Theophany at his baptism, the voice of the Father says, this is my son. And he is anointed by the Holy Spirit as the King of Israel. There's one last parallel that I want to share with you between David and Christ, and that comes at the end of David's life, but parallels to the beginning of Christ's. And we see this in 2 Samuel, also in 1 Chronicles, that David is once again in his old age, after becoming king and having accomplished so much, he's still fighting Philistines and still is obliged to hide in the cave of Adullam. And the Philistines are said to be encamped in the valley of Rephaim, which means the valley of the giants, or the shade. So it's a pretty cool, dark, scary place. And David was in the stronghold. He was in the cave, and the Philistines were occupying Bethlehem, and he was lamenting. And he was saying, oh, if I could only have some water from the well of Bethlehem. And 3 of his mightiest chiefs hear their king's lament, and they daringly break into Bethlehem and get to the well and bring some water back to David. And David says, I dare not drink this, after these men put their lives at such stake, which seems weird, right? Like, that's why they got it for you. He says, no, I'll pour it out for the Lord as an offering for their behalf. And it's a beautiful image. And of course, when the 3 kings, chieftains, or wise men come to Christ, they bring him gifts as well. But those are gifts which in the end are something to be offered for another reason. So especially the frankincense, which is offered in worship, the myrrh, which is offered for the dead, and then of course the gold can be used to flee to Egypt. So brothers and sisters, Christ in so many ways, beyond just the obvious kind of genealogical ways, fulfills the type or the symbolism of David as the son, the ultimate son of David. And throughout this, you see a lot of hiding going on. And that's the last thing I want to ask you to think about in terms of this story. Normally we think of hiding as cowardice, but actually anybody, discretion is the better part of valor, as they say. And in military might, strongholds are important, stealth is important, being able to ambush your opponent is important. It ends up saving your guys' lives, right? So it's militarily the right way of doing things. And you see this repeated over and over again. Christ himself uses the cave as the stronghold from which he emerges, not only in childhood, but of course at the time of his resurrection. He comes forth from the tomb, which is itself a cave, to proclaim victory over death itself, the ultimate Philistine enemy. But brothers and sisters, we have to ask ourselves, in what ways in our life do we use hiding? Because we can use hiding in a good way. There are times when we should secure ourselves and our faith, and that's not a bad thing to do. It says that when all these things were happening, the Virgin Mary did what? She kept them in her heart and pondered them in her heart. She sheltered them. And likewise, when we have our faith, we should be careful how we expose our faith to the world, because the world is not always a friendly place about it. And even when we're with people that should be close to us, like Saul should have been close to David. It was his father-in-law, right? But it was important for David to keep some things private, including his location on a number of occasions. But there's also times when we have to come forth from our hiding with great bravery and not be afraid to share what we know is the truth. And that's what David does when he comes out of the cave of En-Gedi. It says, "My Lord and my King, I mean you no harm." He does it out of love. He does it knowing that it risks his life to do so, but he does it out of love. We can also do the same thing. And when Christ emerges into the world, he does put his life at risk, of course, ultimately paying the price, but then he comes again and reveals to us the real love and the real victory that comes from that. So may God bless you, keep you safe in the strongholds of whatever wilderness you find yourself in, give you shelter, and give you wisdom, the wisdom of David and the son of David. Christ is among us.
He is an overshadow.